You are now watching The Beach.
I cannot believe what has just happened. We're not a week out, we're less than a week out from what is going to be perhaps Nintendo's biggest Nintendo Direct of all time. But against all odds, Nintendo decided to do another Nintendo Direct, not a week before, but a mere 6 days before the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. I am still in complete and utter disbelief. This is something that's unprecedented, and dare I say, absolutely wild. But here's the thing, we've seen the Nintendo Switch wind down. Last year's games were mostly remakes and smaller titles. Sure, there were games like Mario and Luigi Brothership and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, but most games were either on a smaller scale or remakes. Definitely a lighter year compared to something like 2023. So with all that being said, what could possibly be in a Nintendo Switch 1 Direct right before the massive Nintendo Switch 2 Direct to justify having it not even a week before? I know, it's pretty crazy, right? With that being said, was this Nintendo Direct the grand finale of the Nintendo Switch era? Or was it nothing more than a bunch of farming sims?
Farm.
The introduction of this Nintendo Direct started off with remakes of Dragon Quest 1 and 2. I understand the significance of Dragon Quest considering it's one of the most popular series in Japan and definitely has its fan base outside of it. Personally, it's not a game that interests me, but from what I saw it's a very high quality, very similar to Octopath in terms of the art direction. But the thing is, most Nintendo Directs start off with the first party announcement. Even if it's a remake or so, it's usually first party. So to see Dragon Quest made me think, this is going to be very similar to a partner showcase. I mean, what could they possibly show for the Nintendo Switch 1 anyway? It's a good announcement, I'll give it that, but it's not something I would have expected to open up the Nintendo Direct. We then had more announcements of games coming to the Nintendo Switch. We got more information on Shadow Labyrinth, the edgy Pac-Man game as T&D likes to call it. And I'll just go out and say it, this game looks pretty interesting. While I would prefer something like Pac-Man World 2, this is clearly not going to replace that if that's going to happen. It's an interesting take on something like Metroid, where Pac-Man is used as a gameplay mechanic. It's pretty interesting stuff, and definitely a weird take on Pac-Man. I'm definitely down to check it out at some point. But hey, Bandai Namco, it's the 45th anniversary of Pac-Man. Let's keep the celebration going and reveal Pac-Man World 2 Repack next. I would love that so much. We then got some information on a game called Patapon, which is a rhythm game. And this is important to bring up because even though I haven't played the series, when I saw the teaser for it, I at first thought it was something Rhythm Heaven related. Something similar happened in I believe a 2021 Nintendo Direct. There were bananas on the screen, and it said celebrate the 20th anniversary, and I thought it was something Donkey Kong related, but it turned out to be Super Monkey Ball. So while the game looks fine, my disappointment that it wasn't Rhythm Heaven is immeasurable. It seems that Rhythm Heaven has a similar fate to Donkey Kong on the Nintendo Switch, where considering things are wrapping up, it's not going to get a new entry. So at this point,
a rabbit can dream, can't he?
Next up, we got a new Story of Seasons game, and wow, we are so back in 2022 with this one. Remember the legendary Farm Nintendo Direct in September of 2022? This announcement took me back to it. The way he describes the game is exactly like that Nintendo Direct. Overall, cool looking game. The characters do look like Smarty Boy for some reason, but even so, I'm glad that they included at least one farming simulator in the Nintendo Direct. But then, I get a reality check that this is a new era of Nintendo that doesn't focus on farming sims in Nintendo Directs, because we got more information on Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I was not expecting this for a middle announcement. I was expecting this to be the ending announcement, because what could they possibly show for the Nintendo Switch for an ending announcement this late into the system's life? Maybe something like a remake of Kirby Planet Robobot? But even so, I was surprised to see it. But still, seeing more of the game, it looks incredible. I can't say I'm surprised about that. Retro Studios is one of the best game development studios of all time. And the fact that they're making Metroid Prime 4 this impressive on Nintendo Switch hardware is still unbelievable. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a cross-gen game. And considering that the one we've seen, the build of the game, is running on the Nintendo Switch, imagine how incredible it's going to look on the Nintendo Switch too. But even so, psychic powers are really cool. It was nice seeing more of the game. I'm surprised we didn't get a release date, but it is still going to release this year, which is great. I feel a summer release would be really good for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. There's still going to be a little bit of the spotlight on the Nintendo Switch, considering that even if the Switch 2 releases, it's probably not going to have many games yet. So I think a summer release would be a good time. But with that being said, the next game is Mamechi is in the Nintendo Direct? Wow, he's actually in a game beyond Mario Kart Arcade Grand Prix 2? Of course I know he's Tamagotchi. The game actually looks pretty solid. It looks like Animal Crossing, but with Tamagotchi instead. The game is Tamagotchi Plaza, and I found it to look quite interesting. While it's not a game I would probably pick up day one, it's something that looked cool enough where I'd be down to check it out at some point. But even so, always cool seeing some Mario Kart Arcade Grand Prix 2 representation. The next announcement was more information on Pokemon Legends Zaza. With this kind of announcement, this applies to all announcements that are similar, not just Pokemon, but I'm not a fan of when Nintendo announces information about games that we already got information on shortly before. The Pokemon Presents was a month ago, and while I'm okay if they mention the game, going into elaborate detail about stuff we already know within the time frame of about 30 minutes, it just feels like a waste of time. But considering what they showcased of Pokemon Legends Zaza, what did I think? Visually, the game does look better than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but it still looks subpar, especially compared to games like Xenoblade. The wild zones in the game are just so forced. They're just patches of grass in the city and not a natural environment for Pokemon. It just seems like something that's kind of throw wild Pokemon in there. Maybe it'll be elaborated on in the final game, but from what we've seen so far, it's not something that I have a lot of promise in, and I don't really love the idea. Performance also looks iffy, that's something I noticed in the trailer. But hey, we finally found out what Z-A means. It doesn't actually mean you need to be on Zaza to make the graphics look good. It means that there's a scale from Z to A that you have to get through while playing the game. So there you go, the subtitle actually has a meaning. This is a game that if it turns out to be good, I'll be happy, but it's not something I'm even cautiously optimistic for. I expect nothing, and if it's good, cool, but if it's bad, we're gonna have so many other games to play. So yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on Pokemon Legends Zaza, and I will always call it that. I'm not even bummed about Pokemon, because I'm too bummed about Rhythm What? Wait just a minute! We are getting a new Rhythm Heaven? This announcement was hype! Rhythm Heaven is a game that I've been wanting to come to the Nintendo Switch for a very long time. It's been almost a decade since the last entry, and the last one was a remix of the past Rhythm Heaven games. So really, it's been like since 2012 with Rhythm Heaven Fever. And I gotta say, this was an exciting announcement. Seeing a new Rhythm Heaven game was surprising. In a way, it was also not surprising considering that it's a perfect game to come to the Switch 1 even if the Switch 2 is out. You know, considering that it's 2D. It's not really going to take advantage of the increased power of the Switch 2. So having it as a Switch 1 game, and it's going to be backwards compatible, it makes sense and it was so amazing to see it here. The only catch is that the release date is 2026? Look, if a game needs more development time, I'm all for it. I mean, I just did an entire thing criticizing Pokemon, but still, Nintendo usually announces games and releases them a few months after. Seeing an announcement so far out is a little bit strange. Still, a very hype announcement, and I am so happy that Rhythm Heaven's back. That means that the Nintendo Switch has most of my favorite Nintendo series on it. Really, we only missed a new Mario Kart, a new Donkey Kong, and a new Wario Land. There are some other smaller series, but still, seeing Rhythm Heaven was absolutely incredible. Getting into the next announcement, we're nearing the end, and Nintendo announced virtual game cards. What these are, it's essentially just sharing digital games as if they were physical games. The idea itself is cool, but of course there are limitations. You can only lend out digital games for 2 weeks at a time, and you can only share one game at a time. It's a concept that I feel they thought of for the Nintendo Switch 2, and considering the backwards compatibility, they brought it up in this Nintendo Direct. This doesn't seem like a feature that would have been developed for the Switch 1 and they're like, hey, we're just doing this now. It seems like an idea that was made for the Switch 2 and is also coming to Switch 1. Personally, I always get physical games if the option's available, so this won't affect me either way. I do have some digital games, usually indie games, but for most games, they're physical. This is a neat idea, but I don't think the execution's very good. But if you get mostly digital games, I'd love to know what you think in the comments. So then, as the Nintendo Direct wraps up, they have Shigeru Miyamoto to announce Nintendo Today. It's another mobile app just like Nintendo Music, meaning that we're gonna get Nintendo news, and knowing their drip feed output, we're probably gonna get new information once every month if we're lucky. Okay, what else did they have in this Nintendo Direct? You know how Metroid Prime 4 Beyond was the middle announcement? What could possibly close a Nintendo Switch 1 Direct in 2025? What could have justified this Nintendo Direct? I'll tell you what. Tomodachi Life! Not only is Rhythm Heaven coming back, but the long-awaited return of Tomodachi Life is actually happening. From all the comments on Nintendo Direct videos, Tomodachi Life has easily been the most requested Switch game, and actually seeing it happening is just incredible. I will say, when I first saw the game, I was a little skeptical looking at the Miis. They didn't look like how the Miis looked, and I realized that it's because of the shading after looking at the trailer. See, with Nintendo Switch Sports, I'm always worried that they'll replace the Miis. But no, the Miis are here, and there might be some new customization with the Nintendo Switch too. If they could bring in the Mii editor from Miitopia into this new Tomodachi Life, that would be incredible. But so far, everything about this new Tomodachi Life game, being Tomodachi Life Living the Dream, looks really cool. The only problem is that just like Rhythm Heaven, the release date is 2026. Again, if developers need development time, all for it. But for it to be announced so far out, I can still find it odd. So overall, the Nintendo Direct has come and gone. What were my thoughts on it? Was this the grand finale for the Nintendo Switch era? With that last announcement being Tomodachi Life Living the Dream? Hell yes! This is how you close out a console era, having the most requested game finally come to the system. And another thing about Tomodachi Life Living the Dream is that when Switch games are going to be released during the Switch 2 era, there's going to be the same question that there was with the 3DS games that released on the 3DS when the Switch was out. Why is this not on the Switch? Why is this not on the Switch 2 is what's going to be a similar question with upcoming Switch games. But with stuff like Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven that don't take advantage of increased graphical capabilities, I think it's perfectly fine to have them on the Switch. You know, considering that the install base is incredibly high, we are approaching the best-selling console of all time for the Switch, it makes sense, and considering the popularity of Animal Crossing, I'm just surprised that Tomodachi Life wasn't released sooner. But alas, it's finally happening. Before giving my overall rating for this Nintendo Direct, I did want to discuss the prospect of Nintendo Switch games releasing throughout the Nintendo Switch 2's life. Because, like I said before, there were a few Nintendo 3DS games that released when the Nintendo Switch was out, and those games did not do well. They were completely overshadowed by the Nintendo Switch. But the thing is, considering the backwards compatibility of the Nintendo Switch 2, and that Nintendo has better marketing now, I don't think it's something we need to worry about too much. With the right marketing, I'm sure Tomodachi Life could sell well over 5 million copies. And for Rhythm Heaven, while the series is more niche, I still think it could sell over 1 million copies. It's a very popular game with streamers, and that's why Rhythm Heaven has become one of the most wanted Switch games. It really got some recognition with YouTubers and streamers, and I feel like that's part of the reason why it's finally returning. It might be late in the Switch's life, But just like Tomodachi Life, better late than never. Not only is there backwards compatibility to account for, but the jump in power from Nintendo 3DS to Nintendo Switch was absolutely massive. Going from a 3DS game to a Nintendo Switch game was night and day. And seeing something like Luigi's Mansion remade on the 3DS instead of the Switch, the loss of potential was incredibly disappointing. And considering that they're 3DS games, they couldn't be played on the TV. But having a Switch 1 game released during the Switch 2's life, you'll still be able to play it on the TV. It'll likely be increased in resolution with the Switch 2. It's a different situation, and I feel like these games will still be successful. Overall, the grand finale of the Nintendo Switch era Nintendo Direct gets an 8 out of 10. The only things I found odd about it were just that a lot of the major games are releasing in 2026. Considering they're so far out, I don't understand the complete urgency to have a Nintendo Switch Direct shortly before the Switch 2 one. My assumption is that if they have it now, considering how crazy it is having 2 Directs back to back, these games could be in the spotlight. That's my theory about it, but still, it's something that's a little odd. However, this Nintendo Direct being as good as it was nothing but a complete bonus, because even if this Nintendo Direct was the worst Nintendo Direct ever made, just completely packed with farming sims and no first-party announcements, it wouldn't matter too much, because we're getting the massive Nintendo Switch 2 Direct not even a week out. And I'm pretty sure they're gonna include Mario Kart 9 in it. So yes, we just ate our first cake out of the 2 Nintendo gave us. I'm a bit surprised that Kirby Planet Robobot wasn't in this Nintendo Direct, but I still think it's happening. But what was your favorite announcement of the Nintendo Direct? Let me know in the comments, and as always, keep calm and dada on.